Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of Digital Fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and today we have the very last video for spoiler season for Duskmourn, the grand finale. All of the rest of the cards for the set have been spoiled. This is a culmination of like 2 or 3 days worth of spoilers that I condensed down into just one final grand finale video. So there are a lot of spoilers to get through. So we're gonna jump right in, but before we do, make sure you like the video if you haven't already. Help this video get out to so many more people. I would appreciate that greatly. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you never miss an upload. Tons of crazy content on the way. Early access is happening on September 18th, and I am doing a 24-hour marathon stream where I'm going to brew all of the new ridiculous craziness that's coming to Standard, and we're going to hit the ground running and get those decks up on YouTube right away, starting on September 18th, the same day that I'm streaming. We'll be getting deck techs up while I'm in the middle of streaming because we have a new editor, 𝐼𝐋𝐄. Thank you, 𝐼𝐋𝐄, for being a part of the channel. He's going to edit the deck tech videos and get them up even while I'm in the middle of streaming during my 24-hour streams. So lots of crazy content on the way. Also, if you haven't been keeping up with the rest of spoiler season and you're curious about the other cards in the set, I do have a bunch of long-form videos detailing all of the different days of spoiler season, starting right with day 1. So I'm going to make sure I link my spoiler season playlist in the comments and in the description. So check those out if you're curious about the rest of the set. But this is the grand finale. This is the final video. This is all of the rest of the spoilers that I haven't covered up until this point. So let's get right into it. First up, we're going to start with Shroud Stomper. This is an uncommon. It is a 5/5 elemental with Death Touch for 7 mana in the colors of Azorius. Sorry, Orzhov, not Azorius. Azorius is white-blue. Orzhov is white-black. I'm tired, leave me alone. Whenever Shroud Stomper enters or attacks, each opponent loses 2 life, and you gain 2 life and draw a card. Honestly, it's the draw a card part of this that really makes this card good. It's probably too expensive for Constructed. For the mana that you're paying, there's plenty of better ways to draw cards or drain life. But in Limited, this card's going to be absolutely bomby, especially if you're in any kind of a deck that can ramp even just a little bit in the early turns of the game. Get this out on like turn 6 or something like that. This can be really, really good. Just keeps filling up your hand, keeps, helping you win the race with the life gain and drain. And a 5/5 Death Touch is nothing to slouch at. So I mean, it is really expensive, but in Limited it's pretty bomby. It really depends just how likely you are to be able to ramp into something like this, and if ramp is very prevalent, then this card's going to go way up in value. Next up, we've got Dazzling Theater and Prop Room, our first rare of the day. This is another enchantment room. Dazzling Theater is 1 white and 3, and creature spells you cast have Convoke, just straight up. That's kind of nutty by itself. It is a bit expensive, 4 mana for kind of a do-nothing, but if you play around it, it's not really a do-nothing, right? If you have at least 4 creatures on the battlefield, you can play this for 4 mana, and then immediately use those 4 creatures to tap to play another 4-drop, so it's almost like it was free, other than the fact that you have to tap down your board. But if you have even more than 4 creatures, you could theoretically play this and then play an even more expensive spell or multiple spells. So as long as you're going wide enough, that first side is pretty good. But the second side gets even crazier. Prop Room is 1 white and 2 for an enchantment room. Untap each creature you control during each other player's untap step. Now, in Standard, this will be pretty cool in general, just as a way to reuse all of your tap abilities twice a turn cycle, once on your turn and once on your opponent's turn. And if paired with the Dazzling Theater, when you have both sides unlocked, it allows you to cast any kind of flash creatures by convoking them in on your opponent's turn after untapping them. You can use them on your turn to pay for playing other sorcery speed stuff, and then your opponent's turn to flash in creatures after they untap. So that's really cool. But I think obviously where this especially hits home is in any kind of multiplayer format like Commander, where there's a bunch of players at the table, because every single one of those turns you're going to get to untap each of your creatures, and that's where a card like this can get really silly. But even in just Standard, There is a chance something like this could be absolutely ridiculous in some kind of a new Convoke deck. It's nice that both halves sort of cross-synergize with each other, but what's especially good about it is that each half can be good on its own if you build the deck properly around it. So I think this card is really, really cool. It really depends on how much support it gets, whether it's like, oh my god, crazy meta staple, or maybe just slightly too costly and too slow. We'll have to wait and see. But next up, we've got Don't Make a Sound. This is 1 blue and 1 for an instant. You counter target spell unless its controller pays 2, and if they do pay the 2, you get to surveil 2. So it's nice that we have a little bit of value in the late game when they have plenty of mana to pay this and make sure their spell doesn't get countered. It's not an absolutely dead card when you draw it in the late game. It taxes them, makes them lose a little bit of tempo, and also allows you to surveil 2 and fuel some of your graveyard synergies while scrying into your bomb. So I think this is actually kind of okay. It's not going to be first pickable, it's not going to be a high pick or anything like that, but it's nice to see a counter spell like this that's cheap, that requires them to pay mana, not be completely useless in the late game, so I like that. But next up we've got Derelict Attic and Widow's Walk. This is another enchantment room. This one's a common, and Derelict Attic is 1 black and 2, and when you unlock this door, you draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. So this is your standard sort of pay 3 mana and 2 life to draw 2 cards. We've seen a lot of those cards in black, but coming stapled to another entire side, that makes me take notice. Now, what does the other side do? Widow's Walk is 1 black and 3, and whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn. I actually like this decently, a decent amount in Limited. I don't think it sees play outside of Limited. I don't think it's meant to, with it being a common. But it's nice that your draw spell that's kind of costly with 2 life and 3 mana, has some extra value built in that you can get a little bit later in the game. And it's nice that you can sort of go all in on just one of your creatures and force them to have to contend with that creature, and then when it dies, just next turn you attack with something else and, you know, add this ability to the other creatures. So it's almost like a win condition in a way if you're just attacking with 1 creature every turn and holding the rest of your creatures back as blockers. I kind of like that. I don't think this card is crazy or anything, but it fills a nice little niche that you might need as far as card advantage in black decks, especially if you're not running blue, specifically in Limited. Also, if the room deck is a thing, you'll take any room you can get, and this is a nice little bit of card advantage and a little bit of a win-con sort of staple to it, so it might be nice in the room decks. But next up, we've got Seized from Slumber. This is 1 white and 4 for an instant. It costs 3 less to cast if it targets a tapped creature, and you get to destroy target creature. This is nice removal filler. If you're getting towards the end of your draft and you don't have enough removal and you're in white, you could do a lot worse than just to pick one of these up late. That being said, it is very expensive, so you're probably not going to grab it, you know, super early or anything like that. But it's nice that you have the versatility here. No matter what, it's at instant speed. If the creature is tapped, you pay 3 less, so that can either be something that if you top deck this, your opponent attacked with last turn and you could just kill it for 2 mana right now, or you could save it and when they attack in with it, you can kill it at instant speed before you have to even block. But it's nice that even if their creature isn't tapped, you do have a way of getting rid of it. If they're holding back a crazy bomby win condition that has some crazy ability where they don't need to attack with it in order to beat you, it's nice that you can just eventually get to 5 mana and just kill it no matter what. So, nice little bit of filler removal if you're running short for sure. Next up, we've got our next mythic, our first mythic of the day actually. This is Walk-in Closet and Forgotten Cellar. This is an enchantment room. Walk-in Closet is 1 green and 2, and you may play lands from your graveyard. Kind of cool. But Forgotten Cellar is 2 green and 3, and when you unlock this door, you may cast spells from your graveyard this turn. And if a card we put into your graveyard from anywhere this turn, exile it instead. So the part of this card that makes it a bummer is the fact that you can only cast spells for that 1 turn from your graveyard. It's not forever, and it's a whopping 5 mana to unlock that door. So having to spend 5 mana before you get to cast things from your graveyard is pretty rough. That doesn't leave a lot of mana left over to actually cast those spells, unless you're in some kind of a combo deck where you're getting to unlock this for free, or just ramping into a ton of mana where spending that 5, you still have enough mana left over to cast a bunch of spells from your graveyard. But I don't really see that happening very often, at least not without having to jump through a ton of hoops. So I am a bit worried that this card is kind of not quite it. It's just super slow. Even getting to play lands from your graveyard, you're still limited to your once a turn, land drops. So I feel like in order to get the most out of this card, you really have to combo it with multiple cards. You have to find ways to be able to fill up your graveyard with lands. You have to find ways to be able to play multiple lands a turn. And that might get you to enough mana where Forgotten Cellar isn't too expensive to actually use effectively. But if not, I don't know. It just seems like there's a lot of hoops to jump through to make this card work. That being said, it is a Yawgmoth's Will style effect, and that card was incredibly powerful during its day. But it costs two more mana than Yawgmoth's Will, so I don't know. Jury's out on this, but I'm leaning towards it's just too expensive and requires too many hoops to jump through to make it good. That being said, it is a mythic, so I feel like Wizards of the Coast has something in mind in specific that this card is kind of broken with. So if you have any ideas about what that could be, or a way to really break this card, definitely let me know in the comments. The potential is there, but I just feel like it's way too expensive. It has just way too many hoops to jump through, so I'm not sure. But next up, we've got Possessed Goat. This is just 1 white mana for a 1/1 goat. You can pay 3 and discard a card to put 3 +1/+1 counters on Possessed Goat, and it becomes a black demon in addition to its other colors and types, but activate only once. I actually really like this. Thematically, it's very on flavor. It's not too expensive, although it does require you to discard a card, but it becomes a 4/4 demon. That's just cool, especially for a common. Something that's a 1/1 for 1 that you can just drop early and then later on in the game turn it into a relevant 4/4. It's actually pretty decent for a common, especially because if you're in a counters matter deck, having those counters is going to get you extra value. And if you're in a deck that cares about discarding cards, maybe because you're playing Delirium or Threshold or Flashback or whatever the case may be, you can get extra value out of that as well. So I actually feel like this guy is going to be pretty good in limited, especially for common. You can pick 1 or 2 of these up pretty easily later on in the draft, and it can flesh out your curve really well, I think. Like I said, especially in those archetypes where you want things in your graveyard. So I kind of like this. But next up, we've got another enchantment room. This is Meat Locker and Drowned Diner. Meat Locker is 1 blue and 2, and when you unlock this door, you put up to 2 stun counters on it. Tap up to 1 target creature and put up to 2 stun counters on it. I can't read today. That's fine. It's okay removal, right? This is a common, so it's not going to be anything crazy, especially when it becomes attached to extra value with the other room that's attached to it. And that room is Drowned Diner, 2 blue and 3. When you unlock this door, draw 3 cards, then discard a card. So get a little bit of extra card advantage later on in the game. You get your, temporary removal earlier in the game. I don't think this is awful. In the room deck, it's pretty good. You have a way to have removal that's going to count as a room for your room synergies and then get you extra value later. And that's pretty good. I think any of the rooms that have a removal form that is at least relatively okay to cast on curve, I think they're going to be important for the room deck, because dealing with your opponent's board state as you build up your battlefield full of rooms is going to be really important, so that later on in the game you can get your payoff, all of your different room synergy payoffs for having a bunch of rooms on the battlefield. So I think you could do a lot worse than to use something like this for that. Outside of that, I don't think this is all that good. It's probably just going to be one of those late picks in draft that maybe slots in if you're running short on removal or card advantage, because this can kind of get you both. But next up, we've got Monstrous Emergence. This is 1 green and 1 for a sorcery. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you choose a creature you control or reveal a creature card from your hand. Monstrous Emergence deals damage equal to the power of the creature you chose, or the card you revealed to target creature. I kind of like this. A nice little bit of removal, right? Sort of a bite effect, but you get to deal damage even if you don't have a creature on the battlefield, which is kind of nice. Yeah, I kind of like this. I kind of like having a bite spell where your most powerful creature can just kill one of theirs, or if you don't have your most powerful creature out, you can just reveal it from your hand. And even though you do have to reveal, and they get a chance to see what's coming and prepare for it, you know, you get to kill something even if you don't have a creature on the board, and I think that's pretty important. So I actually think this is a really good common for green, and you'll probably pick it fairly high. Not crazy high or anything like that, but decently high, I think, in limited. Next up, we've got Defiled Crypt and Cadaver Lab. This is another enchantment room. Defiled Crypt is 1 black and 3. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, you create a 2/2 black horror enchantment creature token. This ability triggers only once each turn, though. It can trigger on your opponent's turn, though, so keep that in mind. You can get a 2/2 on your turn and a 2/2 on their turn if you have a way to force something to leave your graveyard. Also, you have Cadaver Lab for just 1 black mana. When you unlock this door, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Now, what's cool about this is it's going to work to trigger the Defiled Crypt. So if you get the Defiled Crypt down first, for just 1 black mana, you get your best creature back from your graveyard, and you get a 2/2, which is really, really nice. That being said, it's 4 mana, so you gotta pay the more expensive things first, and then later pay for the 1-drop, which is kinda rough, but you probably want to wait until you have creatures in the yard anyway, so it's not as bad as it seems. I like this. I especially like how cheap it is for the Cadaver Lab, because you can just use that on your turn and have plenty of mana left over if you have anything at instant speed to return something from your graveyard or exile something from your graveyard on your opponent's turn, so that you can get another 2/2, making it so you have most of your mana, you know, left up to possibly trigger the Defiled Crypt on their turn as well, is nice. It's nice that it only costs 1 mana to pull that off, so I actually like this. But next up, we've got Entity Tracker, another rare. This is a 2/3 human scout with flash for 1 blue and 2, and it has the Eerie ability, so whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, you get to draw a card. This is so powerful. Even without the flash, this would be fairly powerful. The fact that this triggers either when you play an enchantment or unlock a room is nuts. Actually, you don't even need to play an enchantment. It's just whenever an enchantment you control enters. So if you had anything that was flickering enchantments or bringing enchantments back from the graveyard or anything like that, all of that is going to trigger Eerie. And it's not stuck triggering once a turn. Most cards like this would be stuck triggering once a turn. It's going to trigger every single time an enchantment enters or you unlock a room. So there are a lot of cheap enchantments, especially in like the Nurturing Pixie deck, all of those black 1-drop enchantments that make you discard a card and stuff like that, that can just get multiple triggers off in 1 turn, draw a bunch of cards. And then on the flip side, rooms aren't nearly as expensive as those types of enchantments, or as cheap as those types of enchantments. So the chance of, you know, playing multiple rooms in a turn, probably not going to happen very often. But what's cool about rooms with this is every 1 card that's a room is going to get to eventually draw you 2 cards. So even though you can't just vomit out a whole bunch of rooms all at once and draw a whole bunch of cards like you can with cheaper enchantments, with rooms you get to just draw multiple cards off of every 1 card. So you get that crazy card advantage built in that takes a little bit longer to unlock, but in the long run you just get an insane amount of draw, right? So I see this working really well in either deck, either in a deck that's just a ton of cheap enchantments that goes wide and triggers to draw a card every single time you play one, or in the room deck, because every single room card eventually draws you 2 cards off of this guy. So either way, this guy is nuts. If you're somehow in a deck that's able to utilize both of those things in the same deck, this guy could be absolutely bananas. And then you factor in the flash so that you can just smash them onto the board at the end of your opponent's turn when they can't use sorcery speed removal, and you can still untap and use all of your mana the next turn to unleash all of your enchantments. Seems really, really nice. Helps you avoid some of that sorcery speed removal, and be a little bit more tricky with how you play the tracker to set up your board state to get the most value off of them. And I kind of just love that. So I think this card is busto. I think this card is going to see so much play in Standard. I think it's so good. If you agree, let me know in the comments. If you have a way of using this guy that I haven't brought up, definitely let me know in the comments. If you disagree, let me know in the comments, because I think you're wrong. I think this guy is insane, but we'll see. We'll have to wait and see when the set launches. Next up, we have Scorching Dragonfire. This is a reprint, 1 red and 1 for an instant, and it deals 3 damage to target creature or planeswalker. If that creature or planeswalker would die this turn, you exile it instead. So it's pretty decent as, you know, removal, specifically in this set, because this set has a lot of things that relies on the graveyard, whether it be Delirium or Threshold or whatever the case may be. Being able to make sure that they don't get extra value for those types of synergies is nice, because you get to exile whatever you kill with this. So even though I'm not super psyched to see something come back and be a reprint, I'd rather a new card. I do think this makes a lot of sense, and it's pretty cool that this is in the set. Next up, we've got Underwater Tunnel and Slimy Aquarium. This is another common enchantment room. Underwater Tunnel costs just 1 blue to unlock, and when you unlock this door, you surveil 2. So just a nice little bit of, you know, get any of your Delirium triggers for just 1 mana, 1 blue mana, trigger all of those things, go wide with enchantments or rooms for all of those synergies. Just costing you 1 blue mana to get it on the board is kind of nice, in addition to the fact that you get to surveil 2. So don't look at this card as, oh, it just surveils 2 for 1 blue, because that's not really how it should be used. What it should be used for is, oh, I get an Eerie trigger. Oh, I get another room. Oh, I get another enchantment on the board for things that give you more value the more enchantments you have. Stuff like that. So you want to use this in decks that care about that sort of thing. And if you are in a deck like that, 1 blue mana to get those synergies while also surveilling 2 is really, really good. And then Slimy Aquarium is 1 blue and 3, and when you unlock this door, you manifest Dread, and then put a +1/+1 counter on that creature. So it also gives you a little bit of board presence, gives you a 3/3, lets you put something in your yard. I definitely think that because both of the rooms put things in your graveyard, this card is going to be a lot better in any deck at all that cares about the graveyard, right? Any of the Delirium decks, any of the self-mill decks. This card's going to be a lot more at home and get a lot more value, so definitely pay attention to that. Probably pretty good in the room deck as well. Next up, we've got Bedhead Beastie. This is a 5/6 beast with Menace for 2 red and 4, and it's also has Mountain Cycling too. So again, just like all of the basic land cyclers that we've seen in this set, it is a relevant threat if you draw it in the late game where you have enough mana to cast it. It's not a dead draw. But at the same time, early in the game, it's not a dead card in your hand. You can just Mountain Cycle it, find your mountain. It can help mana fix you or ramp you out to get to the 6 mana that you need, so that if you do end up top decking a second one of these, you now have the mana that you need to play it. So I love these cards. I think they're going to be very versatile. I like that you can have, you know, bomby cards at the common slot that you can put in your deck that aren't a waste of cards and stuck in your hand as expensive things while you're curving out. They're not useless. They have another use. And I just kind of love that, especially as a way to help fixing in Limited as well, because the more ways we have to color fix, the better Limited is going to be, in my opinion. But next up, we've got Cracked Skull. This is 1 black and 2 for an enchantment aura. Enchants a creature, and when it enters, you look at target player's hand. You may choose a non-land card from it. That player discards that card, and when enchanted creature is dealt damage, you destroy it. Pretty cool. So it's kind of creature removal and a discard spell all in one, and I actually like that. This is sort of 2-for-1 value for a common, which we don't see very often. Granted, you do need to find a way to damage the creature in order to actually kill it and finish it off, but making their best creature super vulnerable to the point where they can't attack with it anymore or block with it anymore, or it's just gonna die no matter what they block, no matter what you block it with. If it attacks any damage at all, you just save a token and it dies. It becomes super fragile. It almost makes it so that they can't use it in combat. Not quite, but they basically only get to use it in combat once, right? Unless your board is completely empty. The more I think about this card, the more I like it. I feel like this might be one that's kind of a sleeper and flies under the radar, because effectively turning their creature into an ineffective combat piece while getting a card out of their hand, I think it's really good. It's gonna get you card advantage a lot of times. I don't know, man. It might not be as good as I'm thinking. I might be over evaluating it, but my gut says that this is actually way better than most people are gonna think it is. And you should probably try running it in your limited deck. I still don't think it's good enough for constructed. It's just too slow. But in limited, I actually think this is really good, especially when you consider all of the different enchantment synergies we have. Playing this is going to trigger your Eerie triggers, right? Yeah, I like this card. I like this card a lot. Next up, we have Roaring Furnace and Steaming Sauna. This is another enchantment room, but it's a multicolor one. And Roaring Furnace is 1 red and 1. When you unlock this door, this room deals damage equal to the number of cards in your hand to target creature an opponent controls. I already love it. A 2-mana thing that's going to deal 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 damage, depending on how many cards you have in your hand, is actually super, super good. Any kind of cheap removal that's got extra value on the other side that you can unlock later is going to be super good, I think. So, without even knowing what Steaming Sauna is, I already think this card is really good. Just because Steaming Sauna is going to give you something, right? Any value at all attached to pretty decent on-rate removal is something you should pay attention to. Steaming Sauna is 2 blue and 3. You have no maximum hand size, and at the beginning of your end step, you draw a card. Okay, this card is bonkers. Is it just me, or is this card bonkers? This has to be bonkers, right? Roaring Furnace is insanely good removal on curve while you still have a bunch of cards in your hand. And then by the time you start to run out of gas, where Roaring Furnace wouldn't be that great, the Steaming Sauna is then reasonably costed to actually come online at the perfect time when you're running out of gas for the Roaring Furnace. So it's like, if you have this with no cards in hand, you just play the Steaming Sauna and you start doubling your card draw every turn. If you have this with a bunch of cards in hand, you play the removal. And either way, you get access to the other side later on. So if you top deck this later in the game when you're out of gas and you play the Sauna, you start refilling your hand, eventually you can use this to remove a big threat. Or you play this on curve, remove pretty much anything they could possibly have out in the first few turns, and then you just have it sitting there waiting to be unlocked later to start drawing you an extra card every single turn. I don't know. This just seems nuts to me. Am I missing something? I mean, granted, you could be in a situation where Steaming Sauna is a little too expensive as a do-nothing, and you don't have enough cards in your hand for Roaring Furnace. So there is this, like, small window in the mid-game where this card could be kind of do-nothing. But I feel like it's just a small window. Once you get a little bit later into the game, you have plenty of mana to just turn on the card draw side. And if it's early in the game, it's super, super easy to just play this and remove a threat and have it be very valuable. So I feel like there's a small window in the mid game, maybe like turn 4 or 5, around there, where this card is not it. But what are the chances that you have to play this card on one of those turns, where you've used up the rest of what you have, and you specifically have to use this card on one of those specific turns? I think the chances are pretty low. I think if this is in your opening hand, you make sure you prioritize using it as removal before your hand is empty, so you get the value you need off of it, and then you can just wait to unlock the Sauna later. And if you top deck it later, chances are it's late enough that the Sauna is going to be really good. So you'd kind of have to draw it on like turn 4 or 5 and also be in a position where you have to play whatever you draw because you've already played out the rest of your good stuff. And I just feel like that's not going to happen very often. So I really do feel like, even though you might be worried that there's that window where this could be not great, most of the time it's going to hit. Most of the time you're going to be at a point in the game where either side is going to be really, really good. So I think this card is bananas, especially if you're in a deck that can get value off of having more enchantments on the board, triggering eerie triggers. If you're in the room deck, this is just going to be nuts and a must-use, right? I think any control deck, honestly, that is using Izzet colors, whether it be Jeskai or Grixis or whatever, is going to want this. I think it's just that good. But next up, we've got Sheltered by Ghosts. This is 1 white and 1 for an enchantment aura. Enchants a creature you control, and when Sheltered by Ghosts enters, you exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Sheltered by Ghosts leaves the battlefield. And then enchanted creature gets +1/+0 and lifelink and ward 2. This card is insane. It's super, super good. I do need to point out the weakness, though. The weakness is, if they kill your creature that this is attached to, they 3-for-1 you. They get rid of the creature, they get rid of the Sheltered by Ghosts, and they get their permanent back that you removed with the Sheltered by Ghosts. So this is like huge risk, huge reward. If they don't destroy this, it's insanely, insanely good. That gets you an insane amount of value, a huge tempo lead, card advantage lead, everything you want. But if they do get rid of it, they 3-for-1 you, and that is going to feel like the worst thing in the entire world. Granted, this also gives ward 2, so it makes it hard for them to actually remove the thing, and by the time they can remove the thing, you hopefully have gotten so much of a tempo advantage from playing this card that it's not going to hurt as bad if they kill the thing and get their thing back. So yeah, I think this is amazing. It's absolutely made for tempo. It comes down on 2, enchants your 1-drop. Your 1-drop swings in with extra power and lifelink. Their blocker's out of the way because you exiled it. You get in, you start gaining life. By the time they remove this, you've turned up the clock like crazy because you gained a bunch of life. You've brought down their life total. You removed their threat for a while. And then when they eventually get it back, hopefully you're so far ahead it doesn't matter. I think that's the best way to use this. The ward 2 is what makes this card good, I think. Without the ward 2, it would still be a good card. But that 3-for-1 that your opponent can hit you with is just going to happen so much more often and so much quicker without the ward 2. The ward 2 is what makes it reasonable, so that by the time they can get that 3-for-1 value and kill your dude, you should be far enough ahead that it shouldn't hurt you that bad. This is one we're going to have to experiment with for sure to see just how good it is. But my gut says anything that's 2 mana that's going to remove any non-land permanent is going to be nuts. So I think this is really good. I think this card is really good. It's got its weaknesses for sure, and we won't know how good it is until we can test it, but my gut says it's really, really good. Let me know in the comments how you feel, because I feel like this card's going to be really divisive. I feel like some of you guys are going to think it's amazing, and other ones are going to be like, are you crazy? It's a trap. But I'm not sure, so let me know in the comments. Next up, we've got Moldering Gym and Wait Room, another common enchantment room. Moldering Gym is 1 green and 2. When you unlock this door, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Not bad. 3 mana, find any basic, put it onto the battlefield tapped is super overcosted for what you're getting, but again, it's a common. So getting ramp and fixing at common that has another side to it, that has some extra value built in, and that is an enchantment, so it counts towards all your things that care about enchantments, you could do a lot worse than that at common. Wait Room is 1 green and 5, and when you unlock this door, you manifest Dread and then put 3 +1/+1 counters on that creature. Okay, that's pretty cool, because Moldering Gym helps you ramp into more mana so that you can get to that 6 mana to actually pay for this very expensive side of the room. So they kind of synergize together like that. You obviously want to play this in a ramp-heavy deck where you can get to that 6 mana as quick as possible. And then you just get a 4/4. You get a 4/4 that could be a much bigger threat when it turns face up, a much bigger threat that still keeps the 3+1/+1 counters, mind you, and puts something in your graveyard. This could be really good in just the right deck. It does have to be in just the right deck. I think if you just slam it in any old green deck without building around it, it's a little bit meh. That being said, it does help fix you, so if you're in a 3-color or more deck, even if you're not ramping like crazy, it might be worth playing just for the fixing and getting some extra value later on. Yeah, I think this card is cool. But next up we have Violent Urge. This is 1 red mana for an instant. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains first strike until end of turn. It also has Delirium. So, if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, that creature gains double strike until end of turn. I like this. I don't know if it's good enough. I feel like in Standard, the Prowess style decks, you know, the Slick Shot decks and that sort of thing, the mouse decks, I think they want to kill you before they have 4 different cards in their graveyard, right? So I don't know how much that Delirium ability matters. And if they are killing you before they can turn on Delirium, they probably don't want this, because it is, without the Delirium, it's not as good as other 1 mana options for pumping your board. That being said, it does give first strike, and if you get the Delirium, it's +1 attack and double strike for 1 mana, and that is bananas. That is absolutely bananas. So, yeah, if there's a deck that can turn on Delirium quick enough, and is a Prowess style deck, this card could be really good. I'm just not sure. I don't know. The jury's out. Let me know, is there a deck that can make use of this? Because I think the normal standard Prowess style deck doesn't really want this because it's just not fast enough. In Limited, it's going to be awesome though. You know, it's a really cool combat trick that's going to save your guy because of the first strike and kill theirs. And then later on in the game, it just turns into a crazy win condition that can give your biggest thing double strike and hit in and just close out the game. And that seems nuts. So yes, very good card in Limited. Jury's out in Constructed. But next up we have Unnerving Grasp. This is 1 blue and 2 for a sorcery. Return up to 1 target non-land permanent to its owner's hand and manifest dread. That's actually really good. You get a 2/2 that could become a much bigger threat later on if it's turned face up, and you get a card in the graveyard, and you get to temporarily take your opponent's most important piece off the table and have them have to waste tempo replaying it. Yeah, this card is really good. A 2/2 and bouncing their thing would be good enough on its own, but a 2/2 that can become something better and something in the graveyard and bouncing their thing. Yes, this will be a high pick for sure. It's not first pickable or anything like that, but definitely a really, really good tempo piece. Play it. Play the card. But next up we have Marvin Murderous Mimic. This is 2 mana for a legendary artifact creature toy. It's a 2/2, and it has all activated abilities of creatures you control that don't have the same name as this creature. This card could be the center of a really crazy combo deck. We've actually seen combo decks in the past that use things like Agatha's Soul Cauldron to give creatures multiple activated abilities, and being able to use that to in different ways make infinite mana and just win the game outright. Marvin here gives us a way to do that actually just already has a body. It's already a body that you don't have to find another body to give those abilities to. You just play this and it is a body and just gets all the abilities. That being said, you have to have the creatures in play in order for Marvin to get the abilities, whereas with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, you only need to have those creatures in your graveyard and then you exile them to give them away. So it is a little bit more fragile if you're going for a combo deck. That being said, maybe you play 4 copies of this and 4 copies of Agatha's Soul Cauldron in some kind of a crazy new combo deck that has way more consistency than the Soul Cauldron combo decks in the past, because now you basically have like 8 Soul Cauldrons in a way. I mean, the Soul Cauldron wants stuff in the graveyard, this wants stuff in play, but having more options and more versatility might make that deck more powerful. My one question to you guys is there something outside of a crazy combo deck like that this would be really, really good in? Do you think this makes the cut in some kind of an aggro deck or some kind of a mid-range deck, and there's some kind of a crazy card to use this in conjunction with that ends up being really good? Off the top of my head, I think any kind of legendary creature with an activated ability is probably going to be the best thing to use this with, because normally you can't have two of those activated abilities available to you at the same time because you can't have two copies of that legendary creature out. But with Marvin, you can have one of those creatures out and the Marvin and have access to using two of that same activated ability at the same time on any turn. So is there a crazy legendary creature that we can use this with where getting double activations is going to be insanely powerful? If you have ideas, let me know in the comments, because the potential's there. I think there's just so many different directions this guy could go that I can't even wrap my head around all of them right now, but I am definitely going to experiment with them during early access, September 18th. I'll be doing a 24-hour marathon stream, so make sure you join me for that. We're going to try everything under the sun, and those decks are going to start hitting the YouTube channel that very day and every single day afterwards, so look forward to that. It's going to be crazy. With that being said, I need some coffee, so it is time for a coffee break. Now, while I'm getting some coffee, I just wanted to talk about how cool I think it is that this set goes into retro 80s horror and... God, guy can't even get a cup of coffee without getting jump scared. Speaking of jump scare, 1 white mana for an instant. Until end of turn, target creature gets +2/+2 and gains flying and becomes a horror enchantment creature in addition to its other types. Kinda love this card. Even if it isn't a good card mechanically, thematically, it just feels so on point. You give them flying so that they pop up out of nowhere. I just love it. It's also kind of a cool combat trick. You know, make sure you can block their flyer. You probably have enough toughness to survive and enough power to kill the guy that you're blocking. Sometimes you could just use it to get past their blockers and win the game for an alpha strike. Very cool card. But let's move on. Next up, we've got Ticket Booth and Tunnel of Hate. This is another enchantment room. Ticket Booth is 1 red and 2, and when you unlock this door, you manifest Dread. Seems very, very good. Getting a 2/2, something in the yard. That 2/2 might be able to turn up into something else that's even crazier later on. And then you have a whole other side to exploit, and that's Tunnel of Hate, 2 red and 4. Whenever you attack, target attacking creature gains double strike until end of turn. I really like this, especially as a common. Getting relevant board presence and enchantment onto the field, eerie triggers, all that good stuff, as well as fueling graveyard synergies and potentially getting a better creature later, and then eventually being able to give anything you want double strike every single time you attack. Lots of value. Bubble in my throat. Lots of value. Very good card. But next up, we've got Balemerc Leech. This is 1 red and 1 for a 2/2 Leech with an eerie ability. Whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, each opponent loses 1 life. So, if the eerie deck really becomes a thing, this is one of those commons that might make the cut in a constructed deck. If you can, you know, stack up multiple triggers, make your opponent lose a whole bunch of life by playing a bunch of enchantments, it could get kind of crazy. Possibly. That being said, a 3-year rotation standard is filled with so much ridiculous power that I don't know if this will actually make the cut in a deck like that, because there's just so much gas. But in Limited, this is going to be great, whether it's in an enchantment deck or in the room deck or whatever it might be in. A 2-drop 2/2 that's going to just make your opponent lose life downtick over time in the right deck is definitely going to be worth a slot as you're curving out. Next up, we've got Conductive Machete. This is 4 mana for an artifact equipment. It equips for 4, which is very expensive, and it gives +2/+1, which doesn't seem like nearly good enough for the equip cost. But when the machete enters the battlefield, you get to manifest Dread and then attach the Conductive Machete to it. So when you think about it like that, you get a 4/3, and potentially that 4/3 is a much more relevant creature that can turn face up into a bigger threat that still has the Conductive Machete attached and gets an additional +2/+1 to whatever that card's base stats are. So just that is kind of okay. 4 mana 4/3 with a lot of potential upside and putting something in the graveyard. And then even if it does die, you get a little bit of extra value, even though that value is overcosted when you are out of gas and you just need a mana sink. Being able to make one of your creatures, you know, +2/+1 better, it's not nothing. So I think I do like this card, but you definitely want to think of it in terms of a 4 mana 4/3 that maybe has upside later. But it's probably just a 4 mana 4/3, so it's pretty cool. I like it. But next up, we've got Restricted Office and Lecture Hall. This is another enchantment room, although this one is a multicolor enchantment room, and we haven't seen very many of those. Restricted Office is 2 white and 2, and when you unlock this door, you destroy all creatures with power 3 or greater. This room on its own is going to be really good in control decks, and it's going to be really good in like token creature decks or any kind of aggro decks that go super wide with 2 power or less creatures, because you don't have to worry about killing any of your creatures at all. It could be a one-sided sweeper, which in the right circumstances can be just absolutely insane. But then it also has this other side, Lecture Hall, for 2 blue and 5. Other permanents you control have hexproof. This makes it a really good card for control, because you have a pseudo sweeper on one side, and then something that can protect your entire board, including whatever win condition you happen to play if you have the mana later on. That being said, it does take quite a lot of mana to make that happen. 7 is a lot, so I'm not sure how good it is. It's definitely at least good because of the Restricted Office side, but how reasonable and how consistent that second half ends up being is really going to determine just how great it is and if it's better than good. That being said, you know, if you're building out the room deck, this is almost a no-brainer. If you're in some kind of an enchantment deck where you need as many enchantments on the battlefield as possible, being able to have your sweeper count as an enchantment for that and not having to slot in something that's a sorcery or something like that is going to add value. So this could be really, really, really good, but it's at least just good. I think it's going to be pretty gnarly, so I'm excited to use it. Next up, we have Rampaging Soul Rager. This is 1 red and 2 for a 1/4 spirit, and it gets +3/+0 as long as there are 2 or more unlocked doors among rooms you control. So in the room deck in Limited, this is going to be kind of a no-brainer. 3 mana 4/4 as long as you just have 2. Just 2. You know, you could play 2 different rooms that each have a cheap side to them and happen to get this online pretty quickly. But what's cool about this guy is even before you get it online as a 4/4, it's still a decent blocker. It can come down for 3 mana and block with 4 toughness, which isn't nothing. It still has 1 attack, which means your opponent's definitely not swinging in with tokens and stuff like that. And then you can kind of drag out the game a little bit by having a good blocker, give yourself some breathing room in order to get to the point where you have 2 rooms unlocked, and then this becomes a pretty damn good threat as a 4/4 that only costs you 3 mana. So I actually think this is going to be pretty good in the room deck specifically. Yeah, pretty good for a common. But next up, we've got Paranormal Analyst. I almost said analysis, and then I almost said analyst. Bear with me, guys. Bear with me. Paranormal Analyst. 1/3 human detective. Whenever you manifest dread, put a card that you put into your graveyard this way into your hand. That actually seems really good. As a common? An uncommon. This is definitely a staple build-around card for Limited. If you can get 2 or 3 of these guys in draft and just completely go deep into Manifest Dread, every time you Manifest Dread, not only do you make the 2/2 that can turn up into a better creature potentially, but instead of putting that thing into your graveyard, you just put it into your hand. You're just drawing cards off of all of your Manifest Dread. This turns all of your Manifest Dread stuff into draw a card, as well as getting board presence. That seems crazy. Am I the only one that thinks this is crazy? This card is crazy. If there is a Manifest Dread deck that makes any sense whatsoever in Constructed in Standard, this card is going to be in there as a 4 of for sure. That being said, it is kind of a bummer that a lot of the other synergies with Manifest Dread are things that also work really well with Disguise and Cloak, you know, other mechanics that allow you to get face down creatures, and this doesn't. This specifically only works if everything is specifically Manifest Dread. I really wish it was, you know, it did something every time you got a face down creature, which I guess wouldn't make sense because you're only putting something into the graveyard with Manifest Dread specifically. Maybe I'm just selfish and greedy. I don't know. But either way, in Limited, this thing is going to be insane, absolutely a build around. Someone in your draft pod is going to try and grab 2 or 3 and build super deep into Manifest Dread. And if they manage to pull it off, I think that deck's going to be really, really powerful. I hope there's some kind of a Manifest Dread deck that manifests itself in Standard. Because I think it'll just be really fun. I don't know. I feel like that deck really wants to take all of the best synergies from Manifest Dread, Disguise, and Cloak and put them in the same deck. So I don't know if it's worth it just strictly going into Manifest Dread. But if there is a way to make that work in Standard, if it does end up being worth it, this guy will definitely be a backbone piece of that deck. But next up we have Frantic Strength. 1 green and 2 for an enchantment aura with Flash. It enchants a creature, and it gives that creature +2/+2 in trample. This is a filler card in common, right? It's cool that it has Flash because it works as a combat trick that allows you to save your guy and kill their guy while still being a piece of board presence that sticks around and adds pressure onto the board state that you get to keep. And that's always going to be worth taking into consideration, you know. So if you're getting towards the end of the draft and you don't have enough interaction, you don't have enough creature removal or combat tricks or whatnot, this can fill your curve and fill that slot decently well. Next up we have Enter the Enigma. 1 blue for a sorcery, target creature can't be blocked this turn, and you draw a card. This card seems designed strictly for the Spell Slinger Prowess style decks. And in that deck, it's going to be great. Make your best creature unblockable. Maybe you Alpha Strike for the win, but if you don't, you're drawing more cards to draw into more fuel for Prowess shenanigans. Yeah, it's going to be great. I don't know if it makes the cut over all the other really good 1-drops, at least in Constructed. I feel like in Limited, this actually might be really good. The fact that it replaces itself by drawing a guard, and then your best creature just automatically hits in, there's nothing they can do about it. It's like early in the game, it just replaces itself very cheaply. Late in the game, it could just let you win in a situation where otherwise it's a stalemate and you can't. So it's worth at least considering for Limited. I don't really know how high of a pick it would be until we're able to kind of try out Limited for ourselves, but it's definitely considerable. It has potential. Next up we have Kona Rescue Beastie. This is the next rare. This is a 4/3 legendary beast survivor for 1 green and 3, and it has the survival ability. At the beginning of your second main phase, if Kona Rescue Beastie is tapped, you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. Not just a creature, a permanent card. This card is bananas. This card would be decently good if it wasn't on a relevant body, but the fact that it's a 4-drop 4/3 and it's actually a decent body that you could be aggressive with just makes it all that much better, right? You don't have to waste your turn. You don't have to give up on committing to putting board presence, putting more pressure on your opponent in order to get this ability, get access to this ability. You still get to play a relevant on-curve creature that's at least somewhat on rate with the mana that you're playing, while also getting access to this ability, and I think that's what makes it so strong. And also the fact that you can snag any permanent with it, not just a creature, is kind of nuts. Obviously, you can just swing in with this, and if you don't trade with something in combat, you're able to trigger the survival ability that way. But he's going to get a lot better if you have a different way of tapping Kona. We already saw Tyvar the Pummeler, and that it's possible to tap Kona that way without having to risk it in combat. And I'm sure there's a bunch of other ways that we can probably do that in Limited as well. I'm super interested in how relevant, how realistic something like that's going to be constructed. But the more cards I see with this survival ability, and the more cards I see that are able to tap things in interesting ways for interesting benefits, the more I start to think that this card is super real. If your opponent doesn't deal with it on the spot, you just use this to play something huge. You could play your Atraxa for free, your Atali for free. You could play your Portal to Phyrexia for free because it doesn't have to be limited to a creature. Or, you know, once Foundations comes out, Omniscience is coming in Foundations, you could play Omniscience for free, and then play anything for free after that, even if they kill Kono later. The possibilities are endless. I think this guy is crazy. If you have ideas specifically about how you want to use Kona, definitely let me know in the comments, because I feel like there's just endless potential, but I'm sure somebody out there has thought of something very specific to do that's really interesting, and I would love to hear about it. But next up, we've got Spectral Snatcher. This is 2 black and 4 for a 6/5 spirit. It has Ward, discard a card, and then you can also Swamp Cycle it for 2 mana. Again, just like all of the basic land cyclers, I love that this is really good board presence late in the game if you top deck it where, at a point where you're out of gas, you have enough mana to play it. But then earlier in the game, it's not a dead card. It's not stuck as a 6-drop in your hand, and you just desperately need to do something, and you can't do anything, because this guy's stuck in your hand. That always feels bad, so being able to Swamp Cycle it early in the game, get some ramp, continue to, you know, build your mana base up so that you can play expensive stuff like this, while also potentially mana fixing you, it's always going to be really good. The fact that this also has Ward, discard a card, so if it comes down as a relevant threat later, your opponent has to 2-for-1 themselves in order to remove it if they're using targeted removal, just makes it even better. So yeah, this is absolutely going to be a great card in Limited. You're going to want this especially if you end up being in 3 colors so that you can color fix a little bit easier. But next up we have Manifest Dread. This is a sorcery for 1 green and 1 that manifests dread. It makes sense. I kind of love that they just made a card that is called the same thing as the ability, and all it does is the exact ability and nothing else. It's just so perfect. I actually really like this card though. It's sorcery speed, which is kind of a bummer. I wish it was instant, but that's probably asking for too much as a common. 2 mana for a 2/2 that could potentially be a much bigger threat later on. That also gives you a little bit of extra silver lining value by putting something in the graveyard. You could do a lot worse than that. I actually think this works decently well to fill your 2-drop slot, you know, on curve creature slot in a green deck, because it essentially gives you a 2/2 bear for 2, except with some upside later in the game. So yeah, I really like this. Next up we have Malevolent Chandelier, a 6 mana 4/4 flying artifact creature construct. You can also pay 2 mana to put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library, activate only as a sorcery. We usually see a card like this in every set. There's always like one artifact that can somehow put something from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library, but I do feel like in this set it's that much more meaningful, because we have Delirium, we have so many different synergies that work with the graveyard, so being able to force your opponent to put stuff on the bottom of their deck and lose some of those synergies is going to be more powerful in this limited format than it would be in other sets limited formats. And then also being able to, you know, save yourself from being milled out if a game gets dragged out into the late game, and you know, you're in danger of being decked out, put your own stuff on the bottom. That's really cool. And then what makes this card even better is it's a super relevant threat. A 4/4 flyer is nothing to scoff at, especially when it's colorless and you can put it in literally any deck. Granted, 6 mana is a lot, but I think if you are low on evasive threats and you don't have any ridiculous bombs that are costing you over 5 mana already, you could do a lot worse than to just add this as your 1 card in the deck that costs more than 5. If you do have better bombs, definitely play those. But if you don't have anything that costs you more than 5, I think you can justify jamming one of these in your limited deck. And upside is you're going to get access to that ability, and against certain opponents, that ability is going to be even more impactful, while you get a relevant flying threat to close out games. So I like this card. Pretty cool. I feel like I say that about every card. I like this card. I like this card. I can't help it. I like the cards. Next up, we've got Sporogenic Infection. Do I like this card? We'll find out. 1 black and 1 for an enchantment aura. Enchants a creature. When it enters, target player sacrifice a creature other than the enchanted creature. And when enchanted creature is dealt damage, destroy it. So this is another one of those enchantments that sticks on a creature and makes it so that if they take damage, they just die, which I kind of love. The other one we saw made the opponent discard a card. This one makes them sacrifice a different creature. So if they only have 2 creatures, you put this on the crappy creature and make them sacrifice their really good creature. And then eventually, you know, even the crappy creature that you put this on is a lot easier to kill. But then, if your opponent goes super wide and they could just sack like a 1/1 token or something, then you probably want to put this on their best creature. That way, when they sack their meh threat, you still have a much easier time of killing their bigger threat. And honestly, I think these cards that have this ability are a little bit better than they seem on the surface. Because initially you're going to feel like, oh, I still have to figure out how to kill it. Like, the threat isn't gone, right? It's just eventually maybe it will be gone. And that feels kind of bad. But don't look at it that way. Look at it as, oh, their creature now can no longer block or attack without definitely dying in the combat. Look at it that way. It kind of nerfs their creature into, go ahead, attack or block. You only get 1 more attack or 1 more block ever again the rest of the game. You want to kind of treat it like that, because that's kind of how it's going to be played. The only time this card is going to be bad is if you literally have no creatures on your board. Because otherwise, anything at all that gets into combat with that thing is going to kill it. So I do have a feeling that this card's going to be a little bit better than it seems on the surface, being able to kind of put their biggest threat out of commission and make it so that it can't actually participate in combat without them losing it, while also making them lose a whole nother creature right away, so that no matter what, it's you at least 1 for 1 when you played it. It's a Diabolic Edict. It's a Diabolic Edict with this free ability that also counts as an enchantment and triggers all your eerie stuff. You know, the more I think about this, the more I love it. At the very least, it's just Diabolic Edict, except a permanent that triggers all of those synergies and stays on the battlefield, could be flickered to happen again, and makes it so it's easier to kill something else. Yeah, there's no downside here. This card's just amazing. The more I think about it, this card is nuts. Can we build a deck that uses this one and the other one? Maybe like an Eerie deck or something? We're definitely going to experiment with it. But we'll have to wait and see just how good it is. But I'm thinking this card is insane. That's what I'm thinking. But let me know in the comments how you're feeling about it. Next up, we have Ghostly Dancers. This is the next rare. This is a 2/5 Flying Spirit for 2 white and 3, which seems really, really below rate until you realize it has 2 very relevant abilities. The first is when Ghostly Dancers enters, you return an enchantment card from your graveyard to your hand, or unlock a locked door of a room you control. This is super good, like on multiple levels. If you get back an enchantment, you're at the very least getting automatic value, so that even if they kill this thing, you got value from it, right? You remove their removal that they used to kill it and get card advantage by getting your best enchantment back from the graveyard. But if you use it to unlock a locked door, it could be really good in a different way. If you have a room down that is really cheap on one side and really expensive on the other, so you got to cast it for cheap, get it into play early, and then you play the Ghostly Dancers and unlock the really expensive side, like maybe that Azorius room that we just saw not too long ago, man, that could be insane. Not only are you unlocking a room for free, but you're unlocking it way earlier than you otherwise could because it's that expensive. And we're not even to the second ability yet, so even just at its floor, this is going to get you the kind of card advantage that absolutely makes it worth running, because even if they kill it, you still got your value. And I think that makes this insane. But then on top of that, it has an eerie ability. So whenever an enchantment you control enters, and whenever you fully unlock a room, you create a 3/1 white spirit creature token with flying. That's nuts. If this thing stays alive long enough for you to just play the enchantment that you got back when it entered the battlefield, you get a 3/1 with flying. But if you just unlock a locked door of a room the turn you play it, instead, you immediately trigger the Eerie and get the 3/1 flyer right away. At that point, it doesn't even matter if it survives. If you play this in a room deck, you could unlock a 7 mana room and make a 3/1 flyer just on ETB. That's like 3-for-1 value in a way. That's insane. And then if your opponent kills it, it doesn't even matter. You basically got 3-for-1 value, and if they don't kill it, you're just going to continue to get even more value turn after turn. I think this card is definitely a sleeper. I feel like people aren't going to realize how good this is until they use it. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everyone realizes how good this is. But if I was a betting man, I would bet that most people are going to see this and think it's good and not just realize how good it is, that it's great. It's much better than good. Until they finally get a chance to play with it and just see how crazy it can be in the moment. I just think this card's gonna pop off. But next up, we've got Duskmourn's Domination. 2 blue and 4 for an enchantment aura. It enchants a creature. You gain control of enchanted creature, but enchanted creature gets -3/-0 and loses all abilities. This is not great. It is very expensive, and the fact that you steal the creature is kind of mitigated a bit by the fact that you end up debuffing your own creature that you then get, right? That being said, it is an uncommon, so it's going to be a lot easier to pick these up in draft, and that kind of makes it make a little bit more sense, and it counts as an enchantment in a set where having enchantments really matters, and you get to trigger like all of your Eerie synergies and stuff like that. So I don't think this card is awful. I think it's in the same position as the last 6-drop we saw, where if you don't have anything in your deck at all that costs more than 5 and you already know you're running blue as one of your main colors, maybe you play this as your one card that costs more than 5 mana, and you can like take your opponent's best creature, get it off the field, and even if it isn't as good for you, it still gives you some board presence, so it's a 2-for-1, and then you can trigger all of your enchantment stuff. So in the right circumstances, I think this will be fine. I think, you know, you play it if you don't have a bunch of other expensive things. But if you have other bombs that are kind of filling that role, that costing more than 5 mana already, I don't know how often something like this actually makes the cut. Next up, we have Live or Die. This is an instant for 2 black and 3, and you choose one. Return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, or destroy target creature. I kind of love this. A 5 mana card that's at common or uncommon that returns a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield is sort of the going rate for, you know, standard reanimation spells. So getting that at instant speed, getting to do it like at instant speed on your opponent's turn, possibly in the middle of combat, to also then block their creature with the thing that you just got back and blow them out, is kind of really good to begin with. But then the fact that you could just use this as creature removal if you're desperate, instant speed creature removal. Now that's never going to be plan A, right? Because 5 mana is a lot. But the fact that in a pinch, your, you know, on rate recursion spell, instant speed recursion spell, can instead be used as instant speed removal is actually really, really good as a plan B, as sort of almost like a charm. I think that's insane. I think this is going to be a really high pick if you're in a deck that plan A is to utilize that first mode. If that's the case, this is a very, very high pick. Even outside of that, I still think this is a decently high pick. It's not like a first pick, but definitely it could just be removal or get back the most balmy thing in your graveyard at instant speed. Is this card nuts? I don't know. I feel like this is nuts. instant speed reanimation for 5 mana by itself is kind of good, right? Kind of crazy. I mean, it's not as crazy as things that we see in older formats like Modern and whatnot, but, you know, for a standard set, for what we're used to getting for 5 mana in Standard, especially at the uncommon rarity, I think this card is a slam dunk. Yeah, I don't know. Let me know in the comments if you disagree. But next up we have Cathartic Parting. 1 green and 1 for a sorcery. The owner of target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls shuffles it into their library. You may shuffle up to 4 target cards from your graveyard into your library. So another way to get some value out of your graveyard back into your library, but this card is especially good if your opponent somehow steals your artifacts or enchantments, because not only does it make them lose it, but it puts it back into your library and not theirs. But even if you just need to get rid of a very problematic artifact or enchantment that they have on their side, this is still pretty good. Honestly, because this set has so many enchantments in it, enchantment removal is at a premium, so even just as enchantment removal, that also gets you a little bit of extra value because you can shuffle 4 things back into your library. I think this card is really good. I think this is probably a high pick for green. I do. I don't think people are going to realize how good it is at first, because it doesn't seem like it's as relevant as removal as it will actually be. But even most of the good creatures in this set are enchantment creatures, so enchantment removal is really good, and the fact that it can also hit artifacts if you need to just makes it even better. Next up we have Let's Play a Game. This is 1 black and 3 for a sorcery. Has Delirium, you choose 1. If there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, you choose 1 or more instead. That's kind of crazy. So, the floor here, 4 mana sorcery speed, you get to choose to either creatures your opponents control get -1/-1 until end of turn, which could be good against token creature decks if they're playing, you know, Glimmer token creatures or whatever. Each opponent discards 2 cards, or each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. So depending on the circumstance, you could use this to finish them off if you get them down to 3, or you could use this to wipe their board, or reduce their board state if you're going to alpha strike in, which isn't bad. But even just 2-for-1ing them by making them discard 2 cards as long as they have at least 2 cards left isn't bad. 4 mana is a bit overcosted for that ability, but being able to be in the scenario where if they have at least 2 cards left, you can do that, but if they don't, you can save it for another mode, is kind of okay. That being said, I don't think this card is great if all it does is choose one of the modes. I still think it's okay, because it has that versatility of being able to choose whatever's best in the right circumstance. But if you can turn on Delirium easy enough in your deck, this card is nuts. Being able to wipe the board, weaken everything else that doesn't go away, so that you can alpha strike in while making your opponent discard 2 cards, while also draining for 3 life. It's just such a huge swing with 1 card. So I think if you're in the Delirium deck and you're able to turn on Delirium easily enough, I actually think this card is a really good pick in Limited for that. But you have to kind of know that you're in that deck and that you can turn on Delirium easily enough for this to be worth it. Otherwise, most decks will be stuck having to choose one mode or the other, and it's not super good in that situation, but still not bad. Still not bad. Next up we have Enduring Vitality. This is the next rare. This is a 3/3 enchantment creature Elk Glimmer with Vigilance for 2 green and 1. And creatures you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color. And then if Enduring Vitality dies, if it was a creature, you return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It becomes an enchantment that is no longer a creature. So these Enduring cards are really awesome. They start as creatures, they come back as non-creatures. Your opponent has to basically use 2 pieces of removal on it to get rid of the ability that it has for good. And that second piece of removal can't be creature removal, which makes it even more resilient. So normally we see these creatures not quite be on rate to make up for the fact that they're kind of automatic 2-for-1s with a decent ability. but this one is sort of on rate. A 3/3 Vigilance creature is nothing to slouch at. You can swing in for 3, and then because of the Vigilance, still tap it for mana afterwards. So in a way, it's almost like it costs 2. Granted, you can't use it for mana the turn it comes into play, obviously, because of Summoning Sickness, but you can the turn it comes into play after it dies when it comes back as a non-creature enchantment, which you should keep in mind because that's actually super effective. But being able to swing in with Vigilance and then still tap for mana, have all your other guys be able to tap for mana on a very resilient body that even if they kill it, it comes back and you get to keep all of your ramping and fixing, seems really good. And then if you can flicker it after it comes back as a non-creature, it will become the creature version again, which is a nice little bit of upside. I just think these cards are a slam dunk. I think the Enduring creatures are going to be absolutely insane in Standard. And I love the idea of using any of these Enduring creatures with Beseech the Mirror, but especially this one because it works on curve. You jam Enduring Vitality on 3, and then on turn 4, not only do you have enough mana to play Beseech the Mirror, but you have the colors you need because your creatures can tap for whatever color you need, which means you get enough black, and at the very least, you could sacrifice the Enduring Vitality to the Beseech the Mirror if you don't have a better target, and then you fetch whatever you want, but Enduring Vitality comes back after you sacrifice it. So I think Beseech the Mirror is going to get used a lot more often in Standard now that we have these cool Enduring creatures, because I think they're such a good combo with that card. But yeah, I just love this. I can't wait to see what kind of crazy brews pop up in Standard with these Enduring creatures, especially this one, because of all the fixing it gives you. I will absolutely be brewing that during Early Access, September 18th. I hope to see you there. But next up, we have Get Out. This is an instant for 2 blue, and you get to choose one. Counter target creature or enchantment spell, or return 1 or 2 target creatures and or enchantments you own to your hand. It's nice to see one of these sort of, creature counter spells have an alternate mode where if it's not useful as the counter spell, you have something else you can use it for. So on the one hand, being able to counter a creature or an enchantment, which is hugely relevant in this format, but then on the other, if you don't have to use it as a counter spell, or you can't use it as a counter spell if your opponent's running out of gas, you potentially have this as a cool way of bouncing some stuff back to your hand and replaying them for value, whether it's to get more eerie triggers, or to maybe replay an Enduring creature after it, came back onto the board as a non-creature version. Put it back in your hand, replay it, it's a creature again, that sort of thing. There's actually a lot of value you can get with that second mode. So it's going to be super fun experimenting with this in Limited and just seeing what kind of archetypes this will work really well with. Any kind of eerie stuff, any kind of ETB value on your creatures or enchantments, it'll be really cool with. And being able to have a potential counter spell that is also that is actually a lot of value, especially for 2 mana. So yeah, I like this. It's also instant speed, so you can wait until your opponent targets one of your things with removal to then return that thing to your hand, as well as something else to your hand that you can get extra value off of on ETBs. So really, really fun here. A lot of cool decision making. Yeah, we're gonna experiment with this. It just looks super fun. But next up we have Brood Spinner, talking about super fun. This is a 2/3 spider with reach for just 2 mana in the colors of Golgari, which is already kinda good. But when it enters, you get to Surveil 2, which is especially good in this format. And as if that wasn't enough, you have kind of this ultimate ability here where you can pay 1 green, 1 black, and 4, so a total of 6 mana, tap and sacrifice the Brood Spinner to create a number of 1/1 black and green insect creature tokens with flying equal to the number of card types among cards in your graveyard. So this is going to be really good if there's an insect deck. We've already seen that Scarecrow Insect Lord that can buff up all of your insects. So in combination with that, this could be really, really nuts. But it's also just going to be decent in the Delirium deck because you are going to have a bunch of different card types. And you can maximize how many of these 1/1 flyers you're getting. But even outside of that, just getting to a point late in the game where just in any normal deck, you'll probably be able to make 4, 5, maybe even 6 1/1 flyers, which is absolutely insane. And you can do this at instant speed. So your opponent uses removal on it and you've got the 6 mana. In response, you sacrifice the Brood Spinner, get however many flyers. Use those to slowly win the game or trade with their flyers or whatever the case may be. There's just a ton of value in this. I think if this ability, this 6 mana ability, was the only good part of the card, it would be too overcosted and too niche because of that. But because it's already a good creature on curve, 2/3 reach for 2 with extra value when it enters, the fact that you have this ultimate ability that can pop off later in the game is just extra. And as just extra, it's insane. So I really love this guy, honestly. It's never going to be a dead card. You don't have to worry about it having the 6 mana in order for it to be relevant, because it's going to be relevant on curve even without that 6 mana, and that's what makes it so good. So I think if you're in Golgari, you probably slam this in limited, but especially if you're in, the Delirium decks, because this guy's going to be pretty gnarly. Next up, we have Exorcise, using a Stairmaster, I guess. This is 1 white and 1 for a sorcery. Exile an artifact, enchantment, or creature with power 4 or greater. Once again, I feel a little bit like a broken record, but because this hits enchantments, and enchantments are so relevant in this format, this card goes way up in value compared to how it would be in other limited formats and other sets. So yeah, I think this is actually a pretty high pick. Any enchantment creature, any artifact, any creature with power 4 or greater, even if it isn't an enchantment or an artifact creature. There's just a lot of versatility here. It can actually hit a lot of targets, a lot more than it appears on the surface, and I think this card is great. You pick it high, not first pickable or anything like that, but you definitely pick it high and run it, because you're always going to have a target. Next up, we have Osseous Stick Twister. 1 black and 1 for a 2/2 lifelinking artifact creature Scarecrow. That's already pretty decent for an uncommon, but it also has Delirium. So at the beginning of your end step, if there are 4 more card types among cards in your graveyard, each opponent may sack a non-land permanent or discard a card, and then Osseous Stick Twister deals damage equal to its power to each opponent who didn't sacrifice a permanent or discard a card this way. I kind of love this. I think in limited it's a slam dunk. Even if you're not in the Delirium deck, a 2/2 lifelinker for 2 that might be able to turn on this other ability later in the game is actually super powerful. But if you are in the Delirium deck and you're going to be able to turn on this Delirium ability consistently, this is just insanely powerful. If you can get this online quick enough, you just start to eat through your opponent's resources turn after turn after turn until they are sort of forced to take the damage. And having that on a relevant 2/2 lifelinking body for 2 is just gnarly. In Standard, I actually think there's a chance this guy sees a lot of play in the discard decks, where you're taking out a bunch of your opponent's cards out of their hand to begin with and reducing the options that they have quick enough. If there is a way to diversify the card types enough in those crazy nurturing pixie discard decks, you could actually see this thing make a huge splash in that kind of deck. I don't know for sure if it makes the cut. It needs just the right setup to make it work. You need enough card types. You need to be able to turn on Delirium easily enough and quick enough to make it worth running in Constructed in that way. But in Limited, this is a no-brainer, and it's definitely possible in Standard. I definitely want to try it. We're gonna see if it'll work in Standard. I have a feeling it might. Not sure, but it might. But that brings us to our next rare. This is Rip Spawn Hunter, a 4/4 legendary human survivor for 4 mana in the colors of Selesnya. It has survival, so at the beginning of your second main phase, if Rip Spawn Hunter is tapped, you reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is its power, and then put any number of creature and or vehicle cards with different powers from among them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is sort of like a super Ranger of Eos. It can't be played for cheaper by convoking it, which is a downside to Ranger of Eos, and you don't get to fetch anything right of way, which is also a downside in comparison to Ranger of Eos. But the upsides are that you get to do this every turn, and that if you have ways of increasing the power of Rip, you get to do it for even more and even more and even more, and you're not you could just find so many things every single turn. So this is a must answer threat for your opponent, and I feel like in the right deck this will come down at a point in the game on curve where your opponent's just starting to run out of removal. So this might be that sweet spot where it comes down on 4 after your opponent had to use their removal on your 2-drop and 3-drop because they were just too relevant to ignore, and now they're out of removal, you get to keep it. If you do get to keep this guy and swing in a couple times, man, triggering that survival ability is going to get you so much gas, and if you're in a survival deck where you don't have to attack to trigger it, it gets even crazier. Your opponent has to run out of removal at some point, right? I mean, the worst thing about this card is that it's fragile. It just dies to removal, and it probably dies before it can even trigger its ability. That being said, even though it has Summoning Sickness the turn it comes into play, if you do have another way of tapping it the turn it comes into play, you could still get value off it the turn it comes into play. And that makes it much closer to the initial value you get with Ranger of Eos, and helps shore up some of the downsides of this card. So it's worth exploring. I think if there's a standard deck that is really deep into survival, that has enough ways of tapping down all of your creatures with survival without having to swing with them, this guy goes way up in value. And that deck might be a thing, and if it is, I think this card sees play in standard. I'm not sure yet though. It might be a little too late. It might be too slow. We're gonna have to try it out and see. But definitely has potential, and it's worth considering. Next up we have Killer's Mask. This is 1 black and 2 for an artifact equipment. When Killer's Mask enters, you manifest Dread, and then attach the Killer's Mask to that creature, and then the equipped creature has Menace. And then it equips for 2 mana. So this is basically a 2/2 Menace creature for 3, but lots of upside. That 2/2 Menace creature can also turn into potentially a bigger creature later on if you get lucky and happen to hit a creature that you can actually hit with the Manifest Dread. Can also put something in your graveyard you might want in your graveyard, and it can also just give another creature Menace later on if they kill this creature. So lots of little bits of silver lining value you can get out of this. So when you think about it that way, a 3 mana 2/2 Menace, even though it's very overcosted, with all of the little bits of upside, it is actually worth it. So I think this is another one of those cards that's gonna be a little bit better than people initially receive it as, once you start playing with it and get a feel for just how much value it can add to the game. I really think if you get lucky and hit like a 4 or 5 drop, really important creature off this, and Manifest Dread that creature, being able to surprise your opponent by turning that creature up and having a super relevant threat on the board like a little bit later in the game, I really think that that's going to be more valuable than people realize right now. I'm excited to mess with it and just see how deep it goes. Next up we have Fear of Exposure. This is 1 green and 2 for a 5/4 enchantment creature Nightmare. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you tap 2 untapped creatures tap 2 untapped creatures and or lands you control. So this can either be a 5/4 trampler for 5 mana, because you have to tap 2 more lands, or it's a 5/4 trampler for 3 mana that taps 2 creatures. So in any normal deck, this isn't going to be great. You don't want to tap down your creatures, right, to play your creature. You also, don't want a 5/4 trample for 5. Although, that isn't that bad, right? That's pretty much on rate. The more I think about it, this card is even good in decks that aren't designed for it, especially because it counts as an enchantment and can work for those synergies. But obviously this card gets way better, and where it becomes insane is in the survival deck. If you have enough of those creatures with survival abilities, getting to tap them down, make sure they trigger their survival abilities in the second main phase without having to risk them by attacking in with them, while also getting a 5/4 trampler for just 3 mana, just seems insane. So if the survival deck is a thing in Limited, which it absolutely is going to be, this is a slam dunk, a very high pick for that deck, because it's just going to be insane. But even outside of that deck, I think this is really good. So even if you just think you might end up going in that direction and drafting into the survival deck, or if your deck just ends up with a few random survival creatures that were good enough to make the cut, even if you're not, you know, building a survival deck in Limited, either way, I think this is still a pretty high pick. At the very least, you ensure that if there's another survival deck at the table, they don't get this thing, and that's important enough as it is. Also adds to your enchantment synergies. It triggers all of your Delirium for only 3 mana while giving you a 5/4 trample, and triggering your survivor abilities from the things that you tap. There's so much potential for insane synergy with this thing if you build your deck right. This card is just awesome. I absolutely love it. Pick it high, guys. Next up we have Surgical Suite and Hospital Room. This is another enchantment room. Surgical Suite is 1 white and 1, and when you unlock this door, return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. That's actually really good on its own. 2 mana to get a 3-drop from your graveyard straight onto the battlefield is sort of the going rate we see for, you know, this sort of spell or ability. That being said, normally we get some kind of extra line of text on spells that do that, but instead we get a whole extra card tacked on here in Hospital Room. 1 white and 3, whenever you attack, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. This is kind of nuts. It's synergizes with everything Zoraline synergizes with, but it also synergizes with Zoraline. If they kill your Zoraline, you could get Zoraline back, and then as you're attacking with your Vigilant Zoraline, you just put +1/+1 counters on it. That's awesome. What I really love this with is with the Oculus creature that we saw not too long ago. It's in one of the older spoiler vids, so if you haven't seen all of the spoilers yet, definitely check out the other spoiler videos I put up, because we cover all of the rest of the cards that were released prior to today. But there was a 5/5 flyer for 3 mana, 1 blue and 2, where you have to exile 6 cards from your graveyard in order to cast it. But if you just discard it into your graveyard or surveil it in there in like the Surveil deck, the Delirium deck or whatever, and then it's just sitting in your graveyard, it's technically still a 3 mana 5/5 flyer. So you just Surgical Suite it. Just put it straight onto the battlefield, and then you don't have to worry about exiling 6 cards from your graveyard. You just get it, and that's awesome. And then as it attacks every turn, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger if you have Hospital Room unlocked. That seems really awesome. So I love this card. Can we pull that off in Limited? We're gonna try. We're gonna try. But next up we have Miasma Demon, or Miasma Demon. I think it's Miasma Demon. Let me know in the comments. This is a 5/4 demon with flying for 2 black and 4. Already kind of okay in Limited, a little bit overcosted, but a 5 power flyer in Limited is a huge threat that can end games quick. So even the 6 mana, I think it's very considerable. When Miasma Demon enters, you may discard any number of cards. When you do, up to that many target creatures each get -2/-2 until end of turn. So turn on all of your Threshold, all of your Delirium by just discarding your hands and then nuking your opponent's board. That is super powerful, especially when you don't have to do any of it. It's all optional. No matter what, you still get a 5 power flyer for your 6 mana, which isn't like amazing, but still good and Limited. And you could just nuke their side of the board while enabling all of your graveyard synergies. That seems really good. I mean, it wants to be in just the right deck where you want things in your graveyard or you want to be discarding things. But if you're in that deck and you're able to synergize just right, this is absolutely insane. And even if you're not in that deck, like a 5/4 flyer that just has this upside of maybe you discard 1 or 2 cards and kill very important creatures that you need to take care of, that seems pretty good. So I like this. It is a bit expensive, so you have to be wary. If you have a bunch of bombs that cost more than 5, this might not make the cut, as you only have very select few slots in your deck that you want to bother to fill with things that cost more than 5 mana. But that being said, if you don't have anything that's 6 or more, I think you absolutely play this if you're in black. It's a very good card. But next up we have Waltz of Rage. This is the next rare. This is 2 red and 3 for a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature. Until end of turn, whenever a creature you control dies, you exile the top card of your library. You may play it until the end of your turn. I kind of love this as a pseudo sweeper. It's important to note that although this hits everything else on your side of the board too, it doesn't hit the thing that is doing the damage. So whatever has the, whatever you target with this, and that's going to be the thing that deals damage equal to its power to everything else. It's not going to deal damage to itself. So no matter what, if you have like a really big creature on the board, you kill everything else on the board, including your stuff, you still get to keep that one creature. And that's probably the best part about this. It's a way to just, you get down a bomby creature, and then this is just board wipe that doesn't kill that bomb. And that's kind of awesome. But in a sacrifice deck, you can actually get value off of all of your own stuff dying anyway, and then you can get access to other cards to play, so you get even more card advantage. And even if you can't play a lot of those things, even if you just play 1 or 2 things, that's still a ton of value if you're nuking your opponent's whole side of the board as well. So, and it's just 1 more mana than Wrath of God. Granted, you do need a creature that you can target with this, so they, if they remove your good creatures, you might not be able to take out the creatures you want with it. So there are hoops to jump through, but in the right scenarios, this card can be absolutely backbreaking and a game changer. I wonder if it sees play in Standard. I'm really not sure. It probably needs to be in just the right deck. Maybe with something with like Vein Ripper or something like that. If you have ideas about how to use this in Standard, definitely let me know in the comments. I feel like there's a lot of potential, but off the top of my head, I can't really think where this card wants to live. Next up, we have Living Phone. Speaking of live, this is 1 white and 2 for a 2/1 artifact creature toy. That is very overcosted. What does it do? When it dies, you look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card with power 2 or less from among them, put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. That's actually not bad. If you're deep into that archetype, where you're playing with a ton of creature cards that have power 2 or less, you get this cool card selection, get the best of them from the top 5 when this thing dies. That might be worth it being slightly overcosted. Getting free value. It's almost like when it dies, draw a card, except it's better than draw a card because you can make sure you're not hitting like a dead card like a land or something when you don't need it. You're getting a relevant creature threat back into your hand. I think that's pretty cool. You definitely want enough power 2 or less creatures to enable it though, so I don't think it's always going to be a good card, but if you're in that archetype, you could do a lot worse than to fill out your curve with one of these, a little bit later in the draft. You're not going to want to pick this high, but it can definitely provide card advantage in the right deck. Next up, we have Cackling Slasher. This is 1 black and 3 for a 3/3 human assassin with Death Touch. Love seeing assassins making a comeback here. Cackling Slasher enters with a +1/+1 counter on it if a creature died this turn. Very short and to the point. It's a 3/3 Death Touch. If something died, it's a 4/4 Death Touch. That's it. But for 4 mana, actually pretty decent, especially at the common slot. You can do a lot worse than to fill your 4-drop curve if you find that it's lacking with something like this a little bit later in the draft. Next up, we've got Ripchain Razorkin. 1 red and 3 for a 5/3 human berserker with reach. Already pretty good stats there, especially for a common, but then it also has the ability to pay 3 mana, sack a land to draw a card. I think this card is amazing. This is one of the better commons we've seen, especially in red. Getting a very relevant body as far as a 5/3 reach for 4 mana is pretty decent to start with, but then in the late game, getting access to sacrificing the extra lands you don't need to just draw gas is super, super good. This lets you outvalue your opponent in the late game, draw into gas, just overwhelm the board state and take control of the board while not having to give up the board presence of playing a 4-drop 5-power reach creature. And the fact that you get both of those in the same guard, actually makes it really good. The fact that that card is a common and it's going to be very easy for you to pick up like later in a draft makes it that much better. Yes, play this card in red. It does everything you want to do in limited. Next up, we have Unidentified Hovership. This is the next rare. This is a 2/2 flying artifact vehicle for 2 white and 1. And when it enters, you exile up to 1 target creature with toughness 5 or less. That means this thing can take out 𝐿𝐴𝐿𝐷, which is all that really matters. Sure, it can't kill Etali or Atraxa, but it kills all of the most relevant threats on curve that are costing less than like 6 or 7 mana, right? Which is very, very important. It also only crews for 1, and it's a flying creature, which makes it a much better body than most of the cards we've seen that have this ability, like Brutal Cathar or Skyclave Apparition, things like that. And then when Unidentified Hovership leaves the battlefield, the exiled card's owner manifests dread. So this is a lot like Skyclave Apparition in that even if they do kill it, they get something back, but they don't get the thing you got rid of. So no matter what, the thing that you exile is gone forever. And then if they kill this, they get something back, but it's just a 2/2 vanilla. Maybe they get lucky and hit something good with it where it can turn into a better creature later on. But that's way better than them getting back the thing that you exiled. So that alone makes it better than, you know, most of these types of cards outside of Skyclave Apparition itself. But I think what makes this a little bit better than all of those cards, even Skyclave Apparition, is that it's in a format where crewing 1 is actually super relevant. We've seen all of these new Survivor cards that are really, really good if you can find ways of tapping them that don't require them to attack. So even if we just use this crew 1 ability as a way to crew every single Survivor card and tap them all down for 0 mana, that's just nuts. That is absolutely insane. And then the fact that we get a 2/2 flyer that also gives us extra value as a creature, an evasive creature on top of it, this card is really good. It is absolutely going to be a hands down slam dunk 4 of in every Survivor deck, 100%. The ability to just have removal, very relevant removal, that doesn't give them the exact thing back when it dies, that can also just tap all of your Survivor things for free and trigger them all, is bananas. We need to build that deck, right? We need to build that deck. Just slam this, use it to tap your Kona. It seems nuts. If you have other ideas of how to use this, definitely let me know in the comments, or maybe an extension of the Survivor idea, specific Survivor creatures that you think would be nuts with this. Definitely let me know in the comments, but this is going to be insane. We're absolutely going to build that deck. Next up, we have Winter's Intervention. This is 1 black and 1 for an instant, and it deals 2 damage to a creature. You gain 2 life. Nice little bit of filler removal here that also buffs your life total, helps you win the race a little bit easier. This is just filler though. If you come up, you know, towards the end of a draft and you seem like you're lacking on removal and you're desperate and need to grab some extra removal to put in your deck, you can do a lot worse than to grab this. It'll fill that slot. That being said, it is just 2 damage, so it doesn't scale super well. But your on-curve removal, it'll be fine. Next up, we have Painter's Studio and Defaced Gallery. This is another enchantment room. Painter's Studio is 1 red and 2, and when you unlock this door, you exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them until the end of your next turn. That's important to note. You don't have to play them right away. You can play them until the end of your next turn. So you're almost definitely going to be able to play whatever you get with this. And that does make it some decent card advantage. And then Defaced Gallery is just 1 red and 1, and whenever you attack, attacking creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. So nothing crazy, just a little bit of extra aggro gas on Defaced Gallery, and some card advantage on the studio, mushed together into 1 card. You'll love to see it. It's just a common, so you can't expect it to be too crazy, but getting the value out of both sides of this is going to be really nice. I think you probably play this in limited. It's not a super high pick or anything, but I think it's decent. Next up, we have Dissection Tools. This is much better than decent. This is a 5 mana artifact equipment, and when it enters, you manifest red and then attach Dissection Tools to that creature. Equipped creature gets +2/+2 and has Death Touch and Lifelink. So at its absolute floor, this is a 5 mana 4/4 Death Touch Lifelinker that puts something in the graveyard and can potentially turn face up into an even better creature that still gets the +2/+2 Death Touch and Lifelink. All of that really good on its own. But what makes this absolutely insane is it equips by sacrificing a creature. You don't have to spend any mana whatsoever. So worst case scenario, you have to sacrifice an okay creature to equip this onto your best creature and make it even more insane. And that's okay. You don't want to lose a relevant creature, but that's still okay. You don't have to spend any mana whatsoever, which means you still use all of your mana every turn to just keep playing gas, which is awesome. Best case scenario, you play this in a sacrifice deck where you have a ton of sacrifice fodder that you want to be sacrificing anyway, maybe for like aristocrat style payoffs to drain life or whatever the case may be. And in that deck, this is just insane. Not only do you get a huge relevant threat that could possibly turn up into a bigger relevant threat, but you have a free sack outlet. You can sacrifice as many things as you want to this thing and just get all of your sacrifice triggers, all of your death triggers without spending any mana, while also having access to this crazy equipment that can turn one of your creatures into an absolute death machine after already getting the initial value of a 4/4 Death Touch Lifelinker. All of that is nuts. So even outside of a sacrifice deck, this is a good card. But in a sacrifice deck, this is going to be insane, and we are absolutely going to brew that. Some new kind of sacrifice payoff Aristocrats brew. We're going to build it in Standard. Early access, September 18th. We're going to do the damn thing. I hope you're there to join us for it. We absolutely have to build that deck. It's going to be bananas. It's going to be bananas. But next up, we have Beastie Beatdown. This is 2 mana for a sorcery in the colors of Gruul. You choose target creature you control and target creature an opponent controls. The creature you control deals damage equal to its power to the creature an opponent controls. So the floor here is it's a 2 mana bite spell. You just get to use it as removal. One of your creatures deals damage to the other creature equal to their power. That's pretty decent on its own, but it also has Delirium. So if there are 4 or more card types among cards in your graveyard, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on the creature that you control. For 2 mana, that's nuts. Like, biting is good enough on its own, but the fact that if you have Delirium, you're biting for an extra 2 points of damage and getting 2 counters that stay on your creature forever, so that your creature is a much more relevant threat for the rest of the game, still for just 2 mana, is gnarly. This is going to be a very high pick, even outside of Delirium decks. Just having bite removal that might be able to give the counters later on if you happened to hit Delirium, even in a deck that's not built to get there quickly and efficiently, is still really awesome. So draft this and play it if you're in Gruul. That's it. That's it. Next up is Keys to the House. This is 1 mana for an artifact. You can pay 1, tap it, and sack it to search your library for a basic land, reveal it, put it to your hand, and then shuffle. So it's nice mana fixing / ramp. But also, you can pay 3 mana, tap it, and sack it to lock or unlock a door of target room you control. So if you get this a little bit later in the game where you don't need to use it to ramp out lands or to mana fix or whatever, it still has really good value in any deck that has a decent number of rooms. Something to take note with here is there are a lot of rooms that trigger an ability when you unlock them, that aren't just a static ability when they're unlocked. So you might actually want to save this to relock a door so that you can pay the mana cost to unlock it again and get that triggered ability again. The most notable one I can think of off the top of my head is there was a black room where one side was pay 5 mana, and when it unlocks, you get a 6/6 flying demon creature token. So you could lock that back up by sacking this and paying 3, so that you can pay 5 all over again, get another 6/6 flying demon which in Limited would be absolutely insane. Is it good enough in Constructed? I don't know. But there is a part of me that thinks there is a crazy room deck that is going to make a splash in Constructed, and it is possible that being able to unlock a door for just 3 mana, well I guess 4, if you do it the same turn you play the keys to the house, could actually be good enough. We've seen some really crazy expensive rooms that could just get unlocked super early with this card, and that alone could be enough to run this in Standard. So it is possible this card sees play in Standard. We're gonna have to try to brew that. There definitely has to be a room deck. Will this end up making the cut in the final version? I'm not sure. We're gonna figure it out though. The next few days I'm gonna be brewing a ton of decks and getting them ready for early access, so this might make the cut. We'll have to wait and see. But next up we have Overlord of the 𝐵𝑒𝑒𝑐𝐻. This is the last Overlord to be spoiled. There's a cycle, 1 for each color. This is a 5/5 enchantment creature avatar horror for 2 black and 3. And it has impending 5 for 1 black and 1. Which means if you pay just 2 mana, it comes into the battlefield, onto the battlefield rather, as an enchantment that is not a creature yet. It is not the 5/5 creature yet. Has these 5 time counters. At the end of your turn, you get to remove a time counter. When the last one is gone, it becomes the creature version of the card. But what's really cool about these cards is all of these overlords, all of these impending creatures have some kind of an ability that happens even if they're not a creature when you initially cast them for their impending cost, or even if you play them just hard casted as their normal versions. Either way that you play it, they have this ability they'll trigger. In the case of Overlord of the 𝐵𝑒𝑒𝑐𝐻, it's whenever Overlord of the 𝐵𝑒𝑒𝑐𝐻 enters or attacks, you mill 4 cards, and then you may return a non-avatar creature card or a planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So even if you just play this for 2 mana, you immediately get a creature card or planeswalker card from your graveyard back to your hand, and also mill 4 cards. So in a deck that wants to self-mill, that wants to fill up the graveyard, either for Delirium or Threshold or Flashback or whatever the case may be, this is actually going to be pretty decent, in that it's going to get you that value right away, and then it's still going to eventually become the creature. It's easy to forget that part because 5 turns seems like a very long time, but if you can just survive, drag out the game, play control, all of a sudden 5 turns later you kind of forgot about this guy, and then poof, he's a creature, and he gets to trigger this ability every single time he attacks. And he doesn't waste your 5-drop slot if you do that. When turn 5 comes around, you know, this guy's already been on the battlefield and is a turn or 2 away from becoming a creature, but you can still spend your 5 mana to play a completely different 5-drop. And then all of a sudden this comes online a couple turns later, and it's a 5/5 swinging in because it doesn't have summoning sickness, and triggering the ability all over again, and that just seems crazy. But where this is going to see the most play, where this is going to be especially insane, is in Insidious Roots decks, because this does everything Roots wants. It fills up your graveyard so you have things to exile to trigger your Insidious Roots. It immediately takes a creature card out of your graveyard and puts it into your hand, which triggers the Roots if you already have the Roots out, gives you a plant token, puts +1/+1 counters on all of your plants, and then, as if that wasn't enough, it could just continue to do this every single turn if it's a creature version. So, and if you happen to mill it into your graveyard, it's another creature that can be exiled to trigger the Roots. So it's just a win across the board. The hardest part about building Roots decks is making sure you're only using very few non-creature cards. You want to keep your density of creatures super high so that you can make sure you're filling up your graveyard with enough gas to just keep the Roots happening. If you start to just put just one too many non-creature cards in the deck, you can have turns where you're milling but whiffing, not hitting creatures, not having anything to exile to trigger your Roots, and you know, your deck kind of turns into a nombo, doesn't end up working out. So if you can figure out ways to have all of those crazy synergies you want while still keeping your creature count super high, that's when Roots decks are going to be at their best. So having this creature that can be a non-creature, but that still counts as a creature while it's in your graveyard, is the perfect synergy you want for Roots, and this will absolutely see play as a 4-of in that deck. We're going to build that one as well. It's time for a Roots upgrade, and this card is absolutely making the cut. Can't wait to build it. Can't wait. But next up, we have the very last card of the day, and the very last card of spoiler season, at least for the base set of Duskmourn. This is Marina Vendrell, a 3/5 legendary human warlock for 5 mana, 1 of each color. That's a WUBRG. It's a lot in that it takes 1 of each mana, but at the same time, you can play this for just 5 mana, and for what it does, 5 mana is pretty insane, because when Marina Vendrell enters, you reveal the top 7 cards of your library, put all enchantment cards from among them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. This sort of reminds me of like a fixed Atraxa, because it's a little bit cheaper, it doesn't have nearly as good of a body, and you have to build very specifically into a certain deck archetype in order to get the value off it, whereas Atraxa kind of is going to get you that value no matter what. But if you are in the enchantment deck, especially the room deck, you can see 2, 3, 4, maybe even 5 cards off this and just completely gas up your hand again, which just seems insane. So not only is it crazy card advantage as soon as it comes out, but it's a must answer threat, because if they don't kill it and you're in the room deck, it has this other ability. You can tap it to lock or unlock a door of target room you control. You don't have to pay any mana at all. You just unlock the most expensive room for free. Trigger all of your unlock synergies, trigger all of your eerie synergies, or lock something back up so that you can pay the mana cost and unlock it. Basically everything I said about Keys to the House, this does, except you don't have to spend any mana to do it, and you can do it once a turn every turn instead of just once and have to sacrifice it like Keys to the House. So this is going to be bananas if the room deck is a real thing. We're going to try. I'm going to try my hardest to build the room deck, probably 2 different versions, because I think there's a version that's trying to be just Jeskai very strictly, and then there's another version of the room deck that wants to be 5 color to make room for, no pun intended, Marina Vendrell here. I think we're going to try to build, we'll build at least the 5 color version, but I think a Jeskai version might be possible too. We're going to see. I don't know how good it's going to be until it really starts to come together, but we're going to build it. We're absolutely going to try it during early access. That deck's going to be nuts. It's going to be so fun if it works. I can't wait to see if it works. I hope it works. I hope it's a real thing in Standard. That would shake up the Standard meta like crazy and just be something completely fresh and new. So I'm really, my fingers are crossed. I'm really hoping that deck is a real thing, a real contender in Standard, because it's going to be super fun. I can't wait. But that's it. That brings us to the end of the video, as if that wasn't enough. This video's like 2 hours long, but join me for early access on September 18th. I'll be streaming a 24-hour marathon stream. I'll be building all of this craziness. I'll be trying all of it out, and I'll be starting to put deck techs up on the channel that same day. Fingon is editing my decks for me. Shout out to Fingon, my new editor. He's going to be putting everything up even while I'm in the middle of the stream. So as soon as September 18th hits, you're going to see the first deck go live on YouTube. And then every single day, we're going to get another deck tech up from early access until we run out of, deck techs from early access. But by then, the set will be live. We'll be playing. We'll keep posting decks. There's so much insanity that's coming, guys. I have so many crazy decks that I'm too tired. I'm slurring my speech now. I need to finish this video and move on. Please like the video if you haven't already. These videos are a ton of work, if you can't tell by how exhausted I am right now. And every single like helps the video get out to more people, helps make it that much more worth it for me to invest all the time it takes to put these videos out. So I would really, really appreciate it. Smash that like button. Help me grow the channel. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a video. Spoiler content is over. It's not completely over though, because I do have a video coming that's all of the brand new commander cards that aren't in the standard legal Duskmourn set, but all of the commander cards for Duskmourn. And then I have another video coming That's all of the new Arch Enemy scheme cards in the Arch Enemy version of the set, so that we can go over all of those in just one video. So those are coming, and I might even do a video that's all of the special guests, if I have time. We'll see if I can fit it in. But at the very least, all the commander cards are coming in a separate video, and then all of those Arch Enemy schemes are coming in a separate video, and then the deck techs are going to flow. It's going to be crazy. Join me on September 18th for early access, or 19th, we'll still be going. I hope to see you there. I'll see you then. I'd like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Wonders of the First. Wonders of the First is a brand new collectible card game similar to games like Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh! And Pokemon, featuring a unique action-based resource economy that helps avoid pitfalls like Mana Flood or Mana Screw, and a battlefield containing multiple realms that unlock over time as you fight for control of the stones. The first 400 card set is called Existence and will launch to retail in the fall, but playtest team starter kits are available to order now. And they haven't forgotten about all you collectors out there. The game contains alternate borderless art variants, as well as highly sought after limited edition numbered prints, culminating in a one-of-one stone foil. And the best part is that the developers have a community-first approach, with 8 print-and-play decks available on their website, as well as a version of the game available on Tabletop Simulator, all for free. For more information, be sure to check out wondersccg.com today. That's wondersccg.com. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck techs, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.